Police, man. The girl got stabbed on the train.
Someone got stabbed on the train? Give me 1 second.
Yeah. I think she's dead, man. I think the girl might be dead, man.
So this is what frustrates me. Everything is political. Truth is political. Life is political. Freedom is political. Church being open is political. And if you read the story of Elijah, every day it's a head-on collision between the prophet and the government.
I want all people to come to Christ.
You want all people to come to Christ?
Yes.
Even my Jewish family members. You want us to come to Christ?
Yes, I hope you accept Yeshua as the Lord and Savior, because Christ is King.
Kiss the sun, kiss the sun. Only a fool would fight against the champion. You better bow, or you better run.
Welcome to Where the Battle Runs Thick. I'm Gabriel Huddleston, and today I want to talk about masculinity and Islam. So, in recent news, the rapper Sneeko, quite the interesting name, was trending in a video in which he and what I don't know, I didn't research, it appeared to be a group of Muslim men in the streets of New York City. But he was talking to the camera saying that, inshallah, or God willing, Islam would be in every house. This is the Republic of New Yorkistan, the Islamic Republic of New Yorkistan. So that's Sneeko's perspective on the direction that New York is headed. And if Mayor Mamdani has anything to say about it, I am sure that is going to be the case. Now, anybody who's been paying attention should have major alarm bells going off in their heads. We've just discovered in recent history that not only is Islam taking over Europe, which we've known for a while, but actually that Muslim rape gangs have been functioning in Great Britain for years to the tune of 200,000 or probably more British girls being trafficked and abused by these Muslim rape gangs. This is all recent history. It's not even recent history. This is current events stuff. This is stuff that is going on actively in the UK right now. We're watching Islam take over, and some Brits try to fight back. The vast majority of them are pretty thoroughly feminized and deracinated and rendered impotent by the liberal, atheist, secular worldview that they have imbibed. And therefore, they're making very little resistance to the encroaching Islamic threat. But that's what's going on in Europe, and we see it. We're watching it happen right now. Over here in the United States, we have these pockets of Islamic aggression. We see it in places like Dearborn, Michigan. We see it in places like New York. We see Muslims trying to bring about Sharia law within the United States. And of course, we've got Sneeko saying that Islam will be in every household, and it's the Islamic Republic of New Yorkistan. So what is the Christian response to this? Islam is not the only threat, but Islam is one of the pressing, clear and present dangers that faces our country right now. How are we as Christians going to respond to it? And what does this have to do with the conversation about masculinity that I began this episode with? Well, a lot, actually, because for many Christians, we have not really thought through what the Christian response to this sort of thing is. We know we're supposed to preach the gospel to Muslims, and that is certainly true. We should desire for all men to be saved, Muslims just as much as anybody else. So that's of course a Christian response. We should preach the gospel. But is that the extent of the Christian response? If your first impulse when you hear a foreign invader bringing a pagan religion into your land and saying that it will be in your house and that they will be ruling over your city, the Christian response is not, the default Christian response is not, well, I hope I can preach the gospel to him before that happens. The appropriate Christian response to that is, over my dead body. We need to be completely clear in understanding exactly what Islamic takeover means. We need to be abundantly clear in our minds, abundantly honest about what the Islamic Republic of New Yorkistan would look like. We know what it would look like. We've watched what it looks like in Britain. It looks like rape gangs grooming young white girls, kidnapping and abusing them to the tune of hundreds of thousands. It looks like women getting assaulted and raped in the streets. It looks like acts of violence and murder against the native population, the citizens of the land. That's what it looks like. It looks like a slow erosion, a slow corrosion of the civil order, beginning with friendly, respectable dialogue and the desire to simply be accepted as a part of the free and democratic society. And then from there, it goes to a desire for special treatment and protection so that the police arrest the victim, and much like the Sikh man that stabbed Henry Novak in England, the police now arrest the victim and protect the villain. And then, of course, the ultimate goal is that you have to listen to the Muslim call to prayer 5 times a day, and your wives have to go about in burqas, because you're now under the government of Sharia law. That's the end game. And anybody who says it's not is either lying or they're ignorant. They don't know what's going on. They do not understand. Okay, so that's why that must be understood, and when we understand that correctly, we recognize that Christians have a duty to protect their families. Nehemiah 4:14. Christians have a duty to stand up for their families, their people, their land, and to fight against the encroaches of wickedness. And we need to have thought through this in advance. Now, let's pause and discuss many of the verses that come up that are used as proof texts to refute the idea that Christian men should have some sort of violent impulse against wickedness. For example, Jesus tells his followers to turn the other cheek. Do not resist him who is evil. If anyone strikes you on the one cheek, turn in the other also. What does that mean? Is that Jesus saying that you should not defend yourself? That you should just allow the wicked to abuse and kill and murder you? Maybe even to abuse and kill and murder your family? Scripture says, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Do not take your own revenge, beloved, for it is written, vengeance is mine. I will repay, says the Lord. Okay, so what does this mean? Does this mean that Christian men are supposed to just roll over in the face of wickedness? Wicked people, evildoers? Of course not. Well, why not? How would we know that that is not what it means? A couple of different things. First of all, it should be noted that the things that are being discussed in these passages, we're talking about how we respond to insults and mistreatment and misuse and abuse of a certain kind. For example, someone striking you on the cheek, that is an insult. We're not talking about someone assaulting you in the sense of putting you in a place of actual risk of serious injury or death. We're talking about an insult here. If anyone asks for your shirt, give them your coat also. If anyone asks you to go 1 mile, go with them 2, which, to my understanding, is a reference to the Roman law, which allowed a Roman soldier to command you to carry his pack for 1 mile for him. So we have this principle of, instead of having an attitude of eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, you were mean to me, I'm going to be mean to you. You insulted me, I'm going to insult you back. You looked at me funny, I'm going to stand up for my honor. I'm ready to brawl about anything and prove my manhood because I'm a manly man and I won't take anything from anybody. That is not a Christian attitude. You insulted me, I will. The Andrew Wilson insult them back is not a Christian attitude. We should not be returning evil for evil or insult for insult, but giving a blessing instead. And this is true. This is part of Christian masculinity. But this is in a different category than the conversation about physical defense. And this is clear, abundantly clear, because Scripture shows us this in many other places. For example, in Proverbs, like a trampled spring and a polluted well is a righteous man who gives way before the wicked. Or the wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are bold as a lion. We see throughout the Old Testament, places like Nehemiah 4:14, it is assumed that it is a good thing for men to stand up and fight for and defend their families. Throughout the Old Testament, we see instance after instance after instance of men courageously getting in the way of the wicked and being blessed for it, being held up as examples of righteousness for it. Phinehas strikes down a couple who is committing a heinous act of sin in the temple, and God blesses him for his act of righteous indignation. Jesus himself braids a whip of cords and uses it to drive the money changers out of the temple. There is a place, a big place, for righteous, godly, manly zeal in our picture of Christian manhood. That does not remove our obligation to, if possible, so far as it depends on us, be at peace with all men. But it does define it properly. It's noteworthy the way that Paul phrases Romans 12:18, if possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. He doesn't say, if possible, at all costs, do whatever it takes to be at peace with all men. He says, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. There are some situations where the person on the other side of the equation has made a decision to where it no longer depends on you. They have crossed a line. They have gone too far, and it is time to act boldly and courageously and decisively. Now, I want to detour and give a little anecdote, and this is a true anecdote. This happened years ago by now. In my life, this is one of the more dramatic occurrences over the course of my life. Happened in the parking lot of a home improvement store. I was out in the parking lot near the truck that I was driving, borrowing from my parents, and I was standing there minding my own business. I think I was loading stuff in the back of the truck or something, when suddenly I saw two men running across the parking lot. The one in front was just kind of an average looking guy, clothed entirely in black clothing, as I recall, and with the face of a terrified rabbit running from a coyote. And he was booking it through the parking lot, and behind him in hot pursuit was a uniformed police officer. And so I watched this transpire. I watched this foot chase transpire as they run across the parking lot. They ran up to a Jeep that was sitting there idling. The criminal ran around the Jeep and climbed into the driver's seat. The police officer ran up on the passenger side and frantically helped someone out of the passenger seat. There was a woman sitting in the passenger seat of this car. The police officer helps her out of the car. I can hear the engine revving, but the vehicle doesn't go anywhere. So I don't know if it was a stick shift or what, but somehow this crook was not able to successfully steal the car to get away. Praise God. So he jumped out of the driver's seat and continued running. The police officer continued chasing him. He ran around the parking lot, and or he ran out further into the parking lot and then kind of turned and started running back towards the store. And he ran near past me, and as he was running, it looked like he was kind of looking my direction. He was thinking, it looked like he was thinking about, I don't know if he was thinking about trying to steal my truck or trying to run past me or what, but he decided not to do that. He kept on going towards the store. The police officer was booking it right behind him. And so they ran past, and then I kind of followed along behind the police officer at a distance because I just wanted to see what happened and make sure that if it turned into an altercation, that the cop didn't end up on the underside of any kind of altercation. And if he did, I wanted to be there to help. Well, as the crook tried to go through the motion door into the store, he tripped and fell. And as he fell, it was like a cartoon. Cash went flying everywhere. And that was the opportunity the cop needed. And the cop was on top of him, and that was the end of that. In a matter of moments, the whole parking lot was swarming with police. So cash went flying everywhere. You got bystanders picking up cash and handing it to the cops. I don't know. He was apparently some sort of robber, bank robber, robbed a store. I don't know. Wild thing to witness. But in retrospect, I've often thought about that situation and wondered if I did the right thing. I've asked others for their input and their thoughts, and many have said that they thought it was wise. Just let the police officer do their job, be there to provide backup if needed. Don't risk getting hurt, getting sued, etc. Now, we'll come back to this. Another conversation, another thought experiment that I've often run around in my head and discussed with others is this. Let's say you're at a restaurant with your wife, and as you go to leave, you're walking down the aisle towards the door, and some guy in a table, as you're walking past, makes some sort of sexual comment and slaps your wife's backside. What do? Do you call the cops? Do you just kind of try to de-escalate and get your wife out of the situation? Do you pick a fight? What's the right response? What is the Christian, godly response in a situation like this? Now, I'm going to leave those there for a bit. We'll come back to those. We'll come back to those two examples, those two thought experiments. We live in a time, in a culture that is extremely feminized, extremely effeminate. A lot of people say this, and it begins to just kind of feel like a kind of whiny complaint where we blame the women for everything. But I'm talking about a worldview perspective issue here. And the men are just as much to blame as the women. We all have plenty of blame to go around. But I'd like to try to define and explain what I mean by that in hopes that it will help connect the dots. In American Christianity, one of the primary virtues, or a whole suite of primary virtues that we focus on, could be called, perhaps, feminine virtues. Now, you have to understand this correctly. When I say feminine virtues, I don't mean that these are virtues that only women are supposed to have. I mean that they are virtues that more easily harmonize with feminine distinctives. Things like being nice, being gentle, being kind, being loving, being compassionate, sharing, giving, being a peacemaker, not fighting, being friendly, etc. These are the virtues that are extolled in our culture. They are extolled even in Christian media for children. For example, if you show your children things like VeggieTales or Boz the Big Green Bear or whatever other normal, modern, run-of-the-mill American Christian children's entertainment, the virtues that are consistently extolled are dreaming big, not being afraid, but it's not being afraid of the boogeyman, being nice, being friendly, sharing, being loving, etc. Now, are these good virtues? Absolutely they are. But they're very lopsided virtues. They can rightly be described as the feminine virtues. They are more in harmony with the way that women are, the way that women think, the way that women are designed by God. God designed women to seek harmony and unity and friendship, to be community focused and relationship driven. That's how women are supposed to be. On the contrary, God designed men for something else. Now, we're still supposed to be loving. We're still supposed to be nice sometimes. We're still supposed to be kind sometimes. We're still supposed to be peacemakers, absolutely, insofar as we are making peace with a biblical measuring stick, not by forsaking things that God would call us to hold on to. But there's certainly a place. We certainly are supposed to be peacemakers. We are supposed to be gentle. We're called to gentleness. We're called to wisdom. These things are still certainly true. But they're not the whole picture of Christian manhood. And this is crucial. This is critical because we have designed, we have built a culture that is governed by feminine sensibilities. The way we talk, what constitutes being honorable and respectable, is governed by a kind of feminine way of looking at the world. We're not supposed to be confrontational. We're not supposed to make a scene. We're not supposed to make a stir. We're supposed to be safe. We're supposed to be careful. And this is not the same thing as courageous and bold manhood. And we need more of the courageous and the bold manhood. So, we need to recognize that in our culture today, there's a sort of cosplay masculinity that the men of America, of American Christendom, fall into. It is a masculinity that is kind of within a box. It's a safe and defined masculinity. It is a masculinity that takes out the trash, that changes the oil, that watches the football, that does the dishes. It has a very defined, specific, I say does the dishes, that gets chided at church for not doing the dishes enough. That has a very specific and defined role. It is a masculinity that, for example, will talk a big game about how when his daughter comes home with her boyfriend for the first time, he's going to be sitting there on the porch cleaning his shotgun. It's a masculinity that is that the wife fawns over when he helps with the household chores, or that the ladies at church think is so sweet when he's concerned that his wife gets home safely. He's allowed to have these elements of masculinity, but it's a masculinity that is stripped of authority and danger. It's good for him to exercise his protective instincts and to exercise his strength when the ladies want him to, when it is looked upon with favor by society, by the sisterhood, by his wife, because after all, she's the boss, happy wife, happy life, by his daughters. They're all for daddy being protective when they don't like the guy and the guy's a creep. However, if they do like the guy, then daddy better mind his own business, and he better not be controlling. He better not be a tyrant who's abusing his authority. And while it's cute when hubby wants to make sure she gets home safe, he certainly doesn't have the right to tell her to be home to tell his wife to be home by a specific time. This is a truncated and cosplay version of biblical masculinity. Now, let's be clear. I'm not advocating for or encouraging men to be actual tyrants. I'm not encouraging them. It is not biblical for a man to treat his wife like a child. It is not biblical for a man to dictate all the intricate details of his wife's life. That's not biblical. His heart should safely trust in her. He should treat her with honor as a fellow heir of the grace of life. He should live with her in an understanding way. But she should honor and obey her husband. She should submit to him as to the Lord. God gave him authority. He's supposed to love his family with the authority that God gave him, not by abdicating the authority that God gave him. You don't protect your daughter against bad suitors by bragging about how you're going to be super scary when she comes home with a boyfriend. You should be way more involved than that. You have authority over your daughter and over her relationships. You don't have the authority to be one of these creepy tyrant dads that won't let their daughter grow up and that tyrannize over their daughter and won't let them get married. And I've heard horror stories, okay? That is not biblical. But you do have authority to say, sweetheart, that is not a good man, and I do not want you to be in a relationship with that guy. And at the end of the day, if she's an adult, you can't, you you can't force her to listen. You can't force your wife to obey you. But that doesn't have anything, that in no way negates that you have God-given authority to say, no, this is what I expect in my household. This is what I want you to do. This is what needs to happen. And if they're going to rebel against that, then they're going to answer to God for that. Okay, so enough of the cosplay masculinity. Enough of the I'm manly because I take out the trash and I watch the football, and my wife thinks I'm hot when I do the dishes. And this is not me saying that men. I do the dishes all the time. Right now, my wife is pregnant with baby number 6. She is very low energy. I do the dishes basically daily. It helps keep the family functional. But I don't do the dishes to make my wife sexually attracted to me. I do the dishes because that's what my family needs. That's what a godly husband, that's what a godly king does. A godly king is looking out for the good of his people. And so when it comes down to it, if the dishes need to be done or the toilets need to be cleaned, he will do it if that's what's best for his people. Or he will assign somebody else to do it because he has authority. He has authority to delegate. He has authority to command. He has authority to lead and to rule well out of a servant-hearted love for his family. But that's a servant-hearted love, not a slavish obedience to the desires of his family, but a servant-hearted love for his family. Okay, so with that being understood, how then should we understand Christian masculinity in the category of being men of action and in not being defined by the comfort levels of women? Now, this is worth thinking about because this is actually an explicitly biblical concept. In the Old Testament, there is a lament in the prophets about, I believe it's the warriors of Babylon, having become as women. The implication being they're not fighting courageously like men anymore. They're under God's judgment and they're running away. They are cowards. They have become like women. Now, is this an insult to women? No, it's not. Now, feminism will tell you, oh my goodness, that's so insulting to women. How dare the Bible speak of women like that? Are you saying that women cannot be brave? Of course I'm not saying that. In fact, women should be brave, but they should be brave women. They should be brave feminine creatures. Female feminine bravery does not look the same as masculine bravery, just like feminine compassion does not look the same as masculine compassion. And feminine bravery, courage is something that would be classified as a masculine virtue. Why would I say that? Because the Bible compares cowardly men to women. In other words, something that is not a problem when it is in a woman, when a woman does it. still can be a problem when a man does it. If two men are fighting, if one man mugs another man, he attacks him in a dark alley, and another man is standing there and he watches and he films on his phone and he does nothing. Is that in the same category as a woman who stands there and watches and films on her phone? If a man does not protect his wife from an attacker, is that the same as a wife not protecting her husband? Now, of course, I'm not saying that there aren't situations where it's good for a female bystander to do something, call the police or whatever. Sure. But my point is, we instinctively know that there's a difference. We instinctively know that one of these two people has the duty of protection. One of these two people is the one that should stand up to protect the other one. When the Bible says that the warriors of Babylon have become like women, it's not an insult to women. It's not saying that femininity is bad. It's saying that femininity is bad in men. Effeminacy is bad in men. It's okay that women are more emotional. It's okay that they're more sensitive. It's okay that my wife would not be able to enjoy or even really physically survive the kickboxing classes that I take. She's not supposed to. She wasn't built for that. I was. So, and by survive, of course, she would live. Like, I'm not saying that she would die because she got, took a couple of restrained, controlled punches to the face. I'm saying it would be so uncomfortable and painful for her, she would be in pain for days afterwards because she's not built for that sort of thing. And if it were an actual fight, it would be so much harder for her to survive. She's smaller, she's weaker. And the same thing is true spiritually. She's not wired for the kind of combativeness that I am. Does that make me better? Well, it makes me better for certain things, which is the point. And she is better for other things, which is the point. That's why we need both male and female. But if your men are wired to live in a way that is pleasing and acceptable to women instead of what is pleasing and acceptable to Christ, then you're going to have a weak, vulnerable society, and it will not survive. And by the way, if your men are wired and programmed to live in such a way as to please and impress the hyper-masculinity, patriarchy, red pill bros online instead of pleasing Christ, that's going to cause problems too. Our goal as Christian men is to courageously obey Christ no matter what. Which brings me to the next point. Courage does not count the cost. Now, of course, we know as Christians, count the cost was a phrase that Jesus used. You count the cost before you come to follow Christ because you don't want to start following Christ. Oh yeah, this is great. I'm going to be a Christian. And then you find out, oh wait, that means I have to repent of my sin. That means Christ actually expects things of me. Oh, I'm not down for that. Okay, well, you should have counted the cost. In that sense, counting the cost is absolutely correct and good and godly and biblical. But in the sense of counting the cost, when it comes to doing the right thing, that's not okay. It has been said that discretion is the better part of valor. But something that I have noticed as I've thought about these things is that far too often discretion is used as the excuse to get out of valor. It is used as a replacement for valor. Instead of being valorous, I will be discreet. That's not how it's supposed to go. Wisdom is not an excuse for cowardice. When the Bible says the prudent sees the evil and hides himself, but the naive goes on and is punished for it, or even, if possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men, this certainly has real and practical applications. For example, the prudent sees the evil and hides himself. You probably shouldn't go to the dive bar at midnight on Friday night. Okay? That's not wise. You're putting yourself in a foolish position. And so then, if you wind up in a bar fight and getting injured and in the hospital, That's kind of on you, buddy. Why you put yourself in the wrong place at the wrong time? Any wise person would have said, what are you doing? That's a terrible idea. The prudent sees evil and hides himself. So don't go on a walk with your wife and family through a mob of Muslim men. Okay, the prudent would see the evil and hide himself. I'm not going to do that. That's stupid. The prudent sees the evil and hides himself, and so would say, I'm not going to go up to, I'm not going to take my family to a Black Lives Matter riot, right? The prudent sees the evil and hides himself. There are situations that are stupid. They're avoidable. You shouldn't have gone there. Don't be a fool. If you are a fool, you will reap the rewards of folly. That's not the same thing as being faced with evil, not through your own folly, but simply because we live in a world of evil, and making excuses for why you shouldn't have to do anything about it. It's not your responsibility. That is cowardice. In the film The Village, Joaquin Phoenix delivers the immortal line when he's asked why he is not afraid, when everyone else is afraid and running away. Why are you not afraid? And he says, I don't think about what's going to happen, only what needs to be done. Quotes like this have been stated repeatedly throughout history. Notably, Stonewall Jackson talks about how he's as safe in battle as in bed. Why? Because God in his providential sovereignty is in control. And therefore, we as Christian men do not need to worry about the consequences of doing the right thing. Our concern needs to only be doing the right thing. That's it. That's what Christian courage looks like. So many of these conversations, once the conversation begins about practical applications of godly masculinity, you will notice that the conversation slides readily into a discussion of the consequences. Well, if you do that, if you speak up against that, if you do that offensive thing, you say that transgressive, I'm not talking about being intentionally transgressive. I'm talking about speaking the truth when it's unpopular, when it's going to get you in trouble. If you do that, if you use physical force against that guy, then you might get sued. Then you might get hurt. Then, okay, that is coward math. We have now entered a conversation of cowardice. Okay? If the conversation is over whether or not that is the right thing to do, then that is a good conversation to have. But if the conversation is, well, it's probably the right thing to do, but think about what could happen, then that is cowardice. That is justifying cowardice. That is using discretion as a replacement for valor. And we need more men who do not do that math. We need more men who don't care what the consequences of doing the right thing are. Well, if you share the gospel, you might get fired. Well, if you this, you might get that. Oh, if you this, you might that. Okay? Duty is ours. Results are God's. I think that was Robert E. Lee that said that. You'd have to verify me on that quote. But duty is ours. Results are God's. Christian men do what is right, and they let God worry about the consequences. So, okay. So let's get a little more practical with this now. And am I saying that wisdom never considers the consequences? Am I saying that wisdom, that Christian men basically have no prudence? They never think about what's going on? No, of course not. Of course not. I'm saying that the question is, what is the right thing to do here? Not what is going to happen if I do the right thing. That's God's business. There will be some situations where, okay, it might be an opportunity to do X, but probably isn't the wisest thing to do right now. Okay, I understand that. I understand there will be situations like that. I'm not saying that the most transgressive, most likely to get you hurt option is always the right option. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that duty is ours, results are God's, and that is the foundation for manly Christian courage. Okay, so now This is critical for how we raise our boys. I, by nature, I naturally was kind of a wimpy, nerdy kid. I was germophobic. I washed my hands all the time. And I was just generally not particularly tough. My dad proactively worked with me on this. My dad was the one that got me into fitness and exercise. My dad, my parents didn't allow me to keep washing my hands all the time or do the other kind of OCD things that I would do as a child. My dad got me into Spartan racing, obstacle racing. So my parents, and specifically my dad, invested in me, pushed me out of being a wimpy nerd to the point where I became those who know me would think of me as being into fitness, being very in shape, being athletic and strong, etc. I went from being a wimpy kid to being a man's man, so to speak. Because my parents worked on me, because my parents taught me and invested in me. And I still have areas where I have to work on this. Absolutely, all the time. In fact, I still have to actively put to death my own germophobia. I still wash my hands too often. And I have to actively make myself not wash my hands. And I'm not talking about not washing my hands after going to the bathroom, okay? You don't have to be afraid to shake my hand. But I'm prone to wash my hands way too many times. I'm the kind of person who reads all the ingredients. I'm the kind of person who can remember, well, I touched this thing and this thing touched that thing and that thing touched that thing, and so I need to wash my hands. That's how my brain works. Now, I could just say, well, I guess that's how I am, and resign to being that sort of man. But that's cowardly. It's cowardly in a small way. It's cowardly in kind of a mundane day-to-day way, but that's important. That matters, because we have this idea of courage like it's some sort of fire extinguisher that's locked up behind a glass door that says break in case of emergency. In case of emergency, break glass, grab the courage fire extinguisher and spray it all over. But that's not how courage works. Courage is a muscle that you have to exercise. When the whole COVID thing went down, it took a lot of work for me to get into the whole civil disobedience thing. We went for a little while where we went along with the mandates, and then it became pretty obvious that this was a bunch of hooey. And it got to the place where I would walk into stores that required a mask without a mask. And it took effort, especially at first. It took effort exercising the courage muscle, exercising the muscle to just say no. No, I am not going along with this silly farce anymore. That took work. Okay? So, in the story of David, when he's talking to Saul about how he's volunteering to go face Goliath, and Saul says, "You're just a boy," and David says, "I've killed the lion, I've killed the bear. This giant's going to be just like the lion and the bear." And David's courage is rooted foundationally in, this is the right thing to do. My trust is in Yahweh. Yahweh will fight for me. So his courage is not just some sort of machismo bravado. His courage is rooted in faith. I trust in Yahweh. Yahweh will fight for me. Who is this man to defy the armies of the living God? Nobody else is going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm getting in there no matter the cost, no matter the consequences. But it is noteworthy that courage did not just come out of a vacuum. It didn't just all of a sudden, all I've ever done is kind of sit with sheep and play a harp. That's all I've ever done. But I'm totally ready to go fight this giant. No. David has killed lions. He's killed bears. He's protected his sheep against wild beasts. And that has prepared him for this moment. So now when the time comes to face his greatest opponent yet, he does it without hesitation. Somehow we think we can go straight to Goliath without the lions and the bears. That's not how it works. We need to raise dangerous boys. We need to be dangerous men, dangerous to the bad guys, dangerous to the evildoers. We need to be the kind of men that bad guys run away from. If you watch the old Western movies, you'll notice, and this leads me into, okay, before I get into the Western movies, let's talk about another thought experiment that's I find very helpful. When we're talking about these sorts of questions, how do we practically walk out these truths? I find it very helpful to ask myself, what would someone that I admire and look up to do? Let's say a character in a story that I would look at and say, they're a good example. They're a heroic person. What would they do? Obviously, we know our ultimate question is, what would Jesus do? Jesus is our model. But part of the problem is that we have so soaked in a gentle Jesus, meek and mild understanding of who Christ is, that we think Jesus would just kind of roll over. He would just kind of be a peacemaker and not really get in the way. We have a hard time seeing Jesus getting angry, even though scripture is explicitly clear that he did get angry, that he did speak with ferocious rhetoric, that he did offend people, that he did even get physically violent when the occasion arose. So we have to make sure that our understanding of Christ is an actual biblical understanding of Christ. Far too often, what would Jesus do is used as a code for basically a kind of effeminate pietism that always results. The answer is always be nice. What would Jesus do? He would be nice. He would be nice. He would be kind. He would be gentle. He would be generous. He would be loving. That's not always what Jesus would do. But this is what our children are being taught. This is what Christian media is constantly emphasizing to our boys. So it can be helpful to do some thought experiments with some other characters too, to help flesh out what godly masculinity looks like. So, for example, let's say we're talking about how to respond to bullying. There's a great one. If you're talking to your son, if you're teaching your son how to respond to, and I hope you don't send your kids to public school. If you do, you need to stop it. But it's such an easy example that I'm going to go with the public school example. If you're teaching your son to deal with bullies by just going to tell the teacher, that's not the right way to teach your sons. You need to be raising scary boys, scary to the bad guys. That starts in the little microcosms of childhood. For example, okay, we'll get to the bullies in a minute. Let's talk about, for example, a small child, okay, small boy. How are you teaching your son? Are you teaching your son to be safe, or are you teaching your son to be brave? For example, your 3-year-old son is climbing on the playset. Do you wrap him up in helmets and pads and not let him climb above the second rung of the ladder? Or do you say, go get it, buddy? And when he comes in with a scraped knee, you say, nice war wound, get back out there and keep going. That matters. You're shaping how your boy thinks about work, about conquest, about pain. The things that our society thinks that they rebuke you for expecting traditional masculine things out of your boys. Like, well, maybe your boy likes to play with dolls. Now, there's some element of reality there. Like, it's not wrong for your son to play house with your daughters and he's the daddy, and well, it might be a little weird if he's the daddy and his sister's the mommy. But you get what I'm saying. It's not wrong for a little boy to play daddy sometimes or things like that. But traditional masculine boyhood is a good, you actually do need to teach your son to be traditionally masculine. You actually do need to teach him to squash bugs. Not to be cruel. I'm not talking about tearing the wings off of butterflies. That's cruel. You don't want to raise cruel boys. That's not godly. That's not Christian. But you do need to raise the kind of boys who will come and smash the spider for their sisters. You do need to raise the kind of boys who are not afraid to get dirty or to work hard. Okay? This doesn't mean that all boys are the same. It doesn't mean they all have the same interests. Some of them are going to be more cerebral, more intellectual. Some of them are going to be more rough and tumble, more in the dirt, more like Pigpen from Charlie Brown. Okay? And that's okay. God has created a variety of men. Masculinity is not a cookie cutter thing, but there are foundational elements that you have to teach your sons. Your sons do need to be brave. Your sons do need to be strong. So maybe he's more into chess than he is into football, but he still needs to learn to play football. He still needs to not be afraid to get tackled. Okay? Maybe he's more into books than he is into hunting. That's fine. He can be a book-loving guy. You can be a masculine book-loving guy, but you still need to know how to work a gun. You still need to know how to clean your gun. Maybe camping isn't his thing. Maybe fishing isn't his thing. Okay, that's fine, but you still need to know how to make a fire. You still need to not be afraid to go get dirty and set up a tent in the mud. These are basic skills of masculinity. Maybe he's not into martial arts. Maybe that's not his thing. Maybe he doesn't want to do competitions and tournaments. Okay, that's fine. But he still needs to learn his martial arts. He still needs to be able to hold his own on a mat. Why? Because this is basic masculinity. Christians should not be Gnostics. We're not just raising theological, mental, spiritual warriors. We're supposed to be raising a package deal. He's supposed to be a terror to the doers of iniquity, both physically and spiritually. He should be able to defend his faith and defend his family. These things go together. So as a little child, you do need to expect him to smash the bugs. You do need to expect him to, and not, again, okay, this does not remove, this isn't to say you need to treat your young son with no compassion. He's just a kid. He's just a child. You absolutely treat him with compassion. I'm not saying you take your 2-year-old who can barely understand English and you're demanding that he smash the cockroach, even though he's absolutely terrified of this massive thing running around on the floor. Like, don't be a cruel father, okay? Be compassionate. There are appropriate ages for different things. But as your son is growing, he needs to be learning. He needs to be doing dangerous things, doing hard things. He needs to be being given jobs and held responsible for completing those jobs and for working hard. You have to stage this age appropriately. Okay, when I say doing dangerous things, I'm not talking about letting your 3-year-old climb to the top of the 40-foot tall tree. Okay, I'm not saying masculinity and stupidity are the same thing. There are wise restraints. There are things that you should say, hey, you can't do that right now. You're not old enough, or that's just dumb. We're not doing that. Okay. We're not lighting the can of gasoline on fire. That's stupid. You don't, just because, well, it's manly because explosions are manly. That's not how it works. Wisdom does come into play here. But if all you're doing is teaching your son to always be safe and always think about the consequences in an unhealthy way, in a hypochondriac way, instead of just a common sense wisdom way, then you're raising him to be a coward. We saw this in sharp relief during the COVID lockdowns. A manly culture, if America was full of men with Christian courage who were not controlled by feminine impulses, the result of the COVID lockdowns would have been the men of America would have collectively chuckled and said, my forefathers survived the winter at Valley Forge. They defeated the greatest military on earth. They fought wild Indian tribes. They conquered the West without air conditioning. They went to the moon. And you want me to hide in my house because of a flu? Good one. That's funny. I've got work to do. Okay, that should have been the result, the response of American men. But it wasn't, because we are weak. We are cowards. The latest one is, now there's some sort of of parasite in the fresh fruits and veggies. So don't eat salad mix because the parasite's going to kill you. It's not going to, it's not even going to kill you. It's going to give you diarrhea. Okay. Don't live in fear. Do not live in fear. Now, am I saying that Christian men should never read the ingredients? Am I saying that Christian men should never take precautions against actual valid epidemics or real contaminants? Of course not. I'm all for healthy eating. I'm all for recognizing when there are real threats, and part of wisdom is sometimes saying, you know what, we're going to stay away from that house that is infected with the bubonic plague. Okay, sure. Amen. But that's very different than having a hypochondriac attitude that is constantly thinking about what is safe, that is constantly trying to maximize my life expectancy and make sure that everything is as easy as possible. We are descended from men who became legends, who became heroes, and they didn't do it because they sought to extend their life expectancy. They didn't do it because they were constantly wondering what habits were going to be the most healthy, the most optimized, the most safe, the most careful, the least dangerous, the best for their mental health. No, they became heroes and legends because they were men of conviction who trusted God and did what was right. Regardless the adversity, regardless the difficulty, they got it done. And that's the kind of men that we should be too. And that's the kind of men that we must raise our boys to be. The kind of men that are courageous, the kind of men that are decisive, the kind of men that are fearless, the kind of men that trust God and that do what is right. That is our job. That is our duty. So now let's wrap this up with some thought experiments in conclusion. Let's try to get practical here. When it comes to the conversation, I want to get back to how you teach your son to deal with bullying. Turning the other cheek should be part of how you teach your son to deal with bullying. If the bully is being mean, he's calling you names, he's insulting you, be a bigger man. Do not return insult for insult. Be secure in who you are in Christ. Turn the other cheek. Shrug it off. Ignore him. In fact, overcome evil with good if you can. Seek to repay his evil with good. Be kind to him. Okay? Amen. But if that bully, there comes a point where that bully is going to keep pushing you until you tell him that's enough. And it is perfectly good and manly and Christian to say, okay, bud, look, I don't want any trouble. I don't want to fight with you. But stop touching me. And he says, okay, what are you going to do about it, you little dweeb? And he shoves you against the locker. And so you sock him in the jaw. Okay? You do. That is child level self-defense, and it is completely appropriate to establish, I am not afraid of you. I will protect myself. I will stand in the way of your wickedness. I'm not just going to sit here and roll over. I've sought peace. If possible, so far as it depends on me, I've sought peace. I wanted to be peaceful. I wanted to be friends. I asked you to. I warned you. I told you to leave me alone. I told you I didn't want any trouble. You wouldn't listen. You keep coming. Okay, here's a 1-2 to the nose and the gut. And next time you're going to think twice about knocking all my books out of my hands. If you're teaching your son to just always run to the teacher, always run, and again, why is your son in public school? Your son should not be in public school. That is part of your job as the father to protect your son, and you're sending him into the lion's den for a quote unquote education. Terrible idea, okay? But again, we stick with the analogy here. You need to teach your son to take responsibility for the situations that he is in. That's what heroes do. They step up. They take responsibility for the situation that they are in. They don't wait for someone else to act. We live in a country full of men who are waiting for someone else to act. They're waiting for their wife to tell them what to do. They're waiting for some superior at work to tell them what to do. They're waiting for the police to show up. And of course, I'm not saying there are never God gave the state the sword. I'm not encouraging some sort of vigilante justice where the men of America just start running around executing justice as they see fit. Not at all. I'm talking about when you're in a situation where evil is being done in front of your eyes, you take responsibility. You step up. God put you there. You be a man. You do something about it. And we have to teach our sons to do that. And you don't teach your sons to do that by saying, if somebody's picking on you, you go tell the teacher. You say, no, son, you try to de-escalate. You try to be a peacemaker. You want to be a friend. You're not trying to pick a fight. But if he's determined to pick a fight, make him regret it. In a proportionate way, not talking about beating the guy within an inch of his life. And that's part of the great thing about teaching children, because children, generally speaking, aren't really capable. They're too small to inflict hardcore, long-term, lasting damage. So you teach your child, this is what a proportionate response looks like, and here's how you should stop a bully. And we're going to take some jujitsu together. We're going to take some kickboxing together, okay? Teach your son how to deal with those sort of things as a man in training, not as a tattletale. Am I saying there's never a time to go get an adult? Of course not. Of course there are times. Okay, Bully Joe, hold out a knife. Okay, go get an adult. That's definitely a time to go get an adult, okay? There are situations where, there's 8 kids. They're all pounding on this one other kid. And I want to get involved, but also I want to make sure that there's nobody else around. If I get okay, go get an adult. I understand. There's wisdom here, okay? But if your only recourse, your only impulse is to go find somebody else to deal with it, you're not raising a man. You're raising a slave, not a hero. We need to raise warriors who step up to the plate, who get things done. So now, let's do the thought experiment. Let's do the thought experiment with, like I was saying, how I like to think of a fictional character. How would they respond in this situation? If you've ever seen the film 10-10, 10-10 is one of my favorite examples of a fictional character who's a young man. He's a young fictional character who's very heroic. He's very courageous. What would 10-10 do if he was at school with his sister and some bully started pulling his sister's hair? Would he run off and tell the teacher? Or would he tell the kid to knock it off? And if it came down to it, he'd sock him in the jaw. He would absolutely sock him in the jaw. You watch the old Western films, you will note that the heroes in the Western films, they don't spend a bunch of time running for help. They just get in there and do what needs to be done. It's one of the things I love about these old Western movies. That's why I like to watch them with my kids. Films like Roy Rogers. Roy Rogers is a man of action. When the bad guys start being bad, he comes in and puts a stop to it. Again, we're not talking about vigilantism. We're talking about courage. Let's run another thought experiment. Let's go with the original thought experiment that we started off this conversation with, okay? But let's pick a fictional character. Let's say Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, all right? And his wife, Arwen. So it's the end of Return of the King. Aragorn and Arwen have just been married. They're walking into the Great Hall together to enjoy the celebrations, to celebrate with their friends and their subjects, celebrate their marriage and the deliverance of Middle-earth from Sauron and his minions. Okay. So they're walking into the Great Hall, and some rascal, as they walk past, some rascal slaps Arwen on the backside and says some sort of crude sexual remark. How would Aragorn respond to that? Would he say, "Excuse me, sir, that was rude. That wasn't very kind. I don't want any trouble. Please keep your hands to yourself and sit back down, okay?" And then he kind of guides Arwen away and tries to de-escalate the situation. Is that how Aragorn would respond? The thought is almost laughable. We all know full well how Aragorn would respond, and it would be something along the lines of grabbing the guy with both hands by the collar, dragging him through the Great Hall in a very ungentle sort of way, bursting out the front doors, throwing him down the steps into the mud, and forbidding him to ever show his face in the king's presence again. Okay? It'd be something like that. We know this. We know this instinctively. Why? Well, because Aragorn is a courageous hero. He wouldn't wait for somebody else to deal with somebody being a jerk. Now, you can also run the thought experiment a different way. How would Aragorn react if somebody insulted his hair or made fun of his outfit? He would probably smile wryly and shrug it off. Unless it was a matter of, okay, this person is this is someone who's, this is an act of defiance of royal authority that's going to be a problem for the kingdom, sort of thing, right? Then, okay, then he would deal with it. But as far as just, well, they've insulted him personally, he would turn the other cheek. He's a bigger man. He's secure in who he is. He would not feel the need to go fight a duel because somebody insulted his haircut. But touch his wife? You would wind up in a pretzel. You would wind up in pain. Why? Because he's a courageous, manly hero, okay? The problem is we can see this so easily, and we admire this so readily when it comes to fictional characters. A great example of this is Steve Rogers in the first Captain America movie. He's in a theater, and the film is showing classic American World War II propaganda, talking about our courageous boys fighting overseas or whatever it is. And a couple of hoodlums in the theater are cutting up, laughing, being disrespectful to the American soldiers in the little film piece that they're watching. So what is Steve Rogers? This is pre-serum Steve Rogers. He's not Captain America yet. He's not a beefcake yet. He's a scrawny little runt. Okay. What does he do? Does he roll over and, well, I can't really handle them anyway. They're bigger than me. I'm just going to munch my popcorn and let somebody else handle it. No. He tells them to knock it off. Ends up taking it outside and getting thoroughly pounded in the alley before his friend Bucky shows up to save him from his impending bludgeoning by this bully that is much larger than he is. So we all see that and we stand up and cheer. We all see that. We love that. Good job, Steve. What a real man. What a courageous hero. It's easy to admire this sort of thing on the screen or in the story. It's a different matter entirely to be that kind of man in real life. Because in real life, if you're in the theater and somebody is making things awful for everybody, someone's being rude, you don't want to make a scene. Your impulse, my impulse, is to be a coward. I don't want to make a scene. I don't want to cause a problem. I don't want to be that guy. Why not? Because I'm a coward. Because I'm controlled by the feminine impulse of just be nice. Be nice to everybody. That's not godly, Christian, courageous masculinity. And of course, again, this is not excusing folly. We're supposed to be wise. We're not supposed to just pick fights over everything. Oh, that guy said a bad word. I'm going to go beat him up. Oh, that guy is, he looks like he's probably not a Christian. I'm going to go beat him up. Of course, that's not what I'm talking about. Resorting to physical violence that's not a Christian's go-to. That's not something we should be doing all the time. But it should be something that's in our arsenal. It should be something that's in our tool bag. Okay? If you haven't thought through this stuff, if you haven't trained for this stuff, but you're expecting to just magically be ready and magically be courageous when the time when the time arises, good luck. I hope you are. I don't expect you to be. And this happens in so many different ways across so many different spectrums, from germophobia to being decisive about what restaurant to go to leading your family with godly, firm authority and not being afraid of how your wife feels, not being afraid of her emotions. Okay, this is a good dovetail here, because you will note, talking about feminine sensibilities, that your wife is likely to not want your son to get in a fist fight. Your wife is not likely to want you. Your wife might even say, hey, if some guy, catcalls me at a restaurant, let's just move on. Don't make a scene. I don't want you to get hurt. We need you too much. I don't want you to get sued, whatever. Okay, well, that it's no surprise that that's how she feels, because she thinks in terms of safety and of wanting nothing bad to happen to the people that she loves. Okay? That's kind of her job. But it's your job as a man to be a protector. It is your job as a man to be courageous. And so if your son gets in an altercation with another boy who was picking on his sister and wouldn't leave his sister alone, and so your son stood up for his sister and things came to blows, and now your son came home with a black eye, and the mother of the bully is chewing your wife out over the phone because your son gave the bully a fat lip, and now his mom's mad. And your son comes home with a black eye, and your wife is telling this to you, and she's all distraught because now Susie from church is mad because your son beat up her son. And the right response, your job as the dad, is to say, that's my boy. You need to encourage your boy to be a protector. Not if he was being foolish, not if he was starting the fight, not if he was being excessive or violent for the sake of violence. But if he was having a godly, masculine, courageous impulse, if his righteous indignation drove him to action, then you'd better give that boy a high five and some boxing lessons, because that's the kind of men we need. And you've got to help your wife see that. You've got to say, sweetheart, we're not going to rebuke our son for doing the right thing. This is who we want our son. No, sweetheart, you can't forbid our boys from climbing trees. I know it makes you uncomfortable. I know it scares you. We're raising warriors. We're raising explorers. We're raising conquerors. We're raising the kind of men who will go west. We're raising the kind of men who will fight bad guys. We're trying to raise William Wallaces here. Not safe, bubble-wrapped little cogs in the American machine who will grow up and live long and fruitless and wimpy lives and not accomplish anything great. That's not what we're doing here, sweetheart. We're raising men. You've got to teach your sons, and you've got to teach your wife. You've got to teach your daughters to recognize godly masculinity. You've got to teach your boys to embody godly masculinity. You've got to teach your wife and your daughters to support it and encourage it, not to try to bubble wrap it. Now, this all ties in because, and I had this conversation with my wife, we were talking about this, while her impulse would be to want me to de-escalate the situation, to not pick a fight. If a guy, touches her inappropriately, just let's not make a scene. I don't want you to get hurt. I don't want you to get sued. So long as he's not actually attacking me, let's just move on. Okay. That's her impulse. But the funny thing is that when I tell her, well, I don't really care. I know that's what you think, but that's not what I'm going to do. The guy's in for it. I'm socking him in the jaw. Her reaction is priceless. Because even though that makes her uncomfortable, she cannot deny that deep down, that's what she hopes I would do. That's what she knows is right. That's what she feels is is manly and is heroic and is courageous and makes her feel like her man is really taking care of her. She knows it deep down. So when we talk about being controlled by feminine sensibilities, there's this idea. Right now, the ideal man in American culture is the nice guy. He's sensitive, he's kind, he's supportive. In fact, if you look at the list of adjectives, he's mostly a helper suitable to the woman who is the main character in the story. And how are men taught to become even sexually attractive to their wives? You want to be attractive to your wife? Well, go do the dishes. Well, happy wife, happy life. Maybe if you do enough things that make her happy, then, then she will feel loved and then she will respect you. But that's not biblical advice, certainly. She's called to be the helper suitable to you, not the other way around. You're supposed to be the man on the mission, and you are calling her to follow you on the mission that God has given you. But also, it's not actually attractive to her. This is not, there are times to do the dishes if that's what your family needs. And you're making that decision as the head of the household to love and serve your family for their good by doing something that your family needs. Good kings are not above doing the work that the kingdom needs, but they're also not slavishly just trying to do all the work for everybody to please everybody. No, they know when to delegate. They know when to say, this is your job and you need to do it. But they're also willing to love and to serve and to meet the needs of the people as needed. But the idea that you're gonna do enough household chores that she's gonna start finding you sexually attractive is exactly backwards. You need to be the man. You need to be the kind of man who is on a mission, who is masculine. Surprisingly, masculinity is attractive to femininity. So when you start stepping up and taking charge and taking the lead and not living in fear of her emotions, look, think about it this way. When she gives her opinion that it's scary she's afraid about, you intervening in this hypothetical scene in Applebee's when some guy, cat calls her and slaps her on the backside, and you're going to get all in the guy's face, and that scares her because of all the potential things that could happen. And when you say, I know, I understand, but doesn't matter, I'm doing it anyway, you're showing her that the things that worry her, the things that she's afraid of, you're not afraid of those things. You're in charge, you're decisive, and you're going to do the right thing. You're going to do what needs to be done. And she may discover that it's actually attractive to be married to a man. And you may discover that your wife looks at you in a new light when you are the kind of man that commands respect, the kind of man who is actually a hero, the kind of man who acts like the characters that she would admire in films, instead of who acts like the kind of man that she thinks she wants because he's safe and he's nice. Now, does this advice mean that you should be, therefore, now just kind of run roughshod over all your wife's desires because you're a man? No. Does it mean don't ask her opinion on anything? Don't care about her emotions? No. Be compassionate. Live with her in an understanding way. Be generous. Ask her opinions and preferences. Bless her. Lavish your love and affection on her. Take great care of her. But do it as the man. Do it as the head of the house. And when it comes to these areas of protectiveness, you need to set an example for your family that I'm the man of the house. I'm going to protect my family. It is so ironic that these questions come up and the impulse is, no, don't do anything because then you might get hurt or you might get sued and our family needs you. If you get hurt, what's our family going to do? If you get sued, or thrown in jail, what's our family going to do without you? Well, what's the point of me being here with the family if I'm not going to be a protector? You say the family needs a husband and father, so don't be a good husband and father right now in this instance so that you can stay around to be a husband and father later. Somehow, it's always not quite the right time for heroism. Somehow we like the idea of acting courageously, just never right now. But godly manhood lives in the now. Godly manhood does the right thing in the now. Godly manhood does the courageous thing in the face of the present evil, regardless of the consequences. I would rather be in the hospital or in jail with my head held high because I did the right thing than live a long life because I avoided all of my opportunities to be a courageous man. So, at the end of the day, I'm running the math in advance. And I know it's easy to say all of this stuff. I'm praying and trusting in the grace of God that when the rubber meets the road, I will be ready and I will act courageously. I'm praying for that. And if I don't, then I should be ashamed and I should repent. This is part of why I've started taking kickboxing, because I don't enjoy getting punched in the face. But it is a small microcosm in which to practice courage. Because if God puts me on the train near Arena Zarutska, I do not want to miss that opportunity. I do not want to sit by and watch. I want to get involved, and I might get hurt. I might die. I might get sued. Okay. So be it. But by the grace of God, I'm going to practice courage now. I'm going to kill my germophobia now. I'm going to be decisive in how I lead my family now. I'm going to learn kickboxing now. I'm going to face my fears now. I'm going to make myself do the athletic things now. Maybe the things that are slightly uncomfortable for me. Maybe they're hard work, or maybe it's, jumping off the diving board. That's a little high for me. It's a little scary. Whatever it is, I'm going to practice courage now because I want to be used to facing my fears. Not in a foolish way, not in an arrogant way, but in a courageous way as a man of God. Because when it comes down to it, somebody touches my wife, somebody touches my kids, they lay their hands on them, I will lay my hands on them. The moment you touch my family, it no longer depends on me. You made your choice, and I've already made mine. Okay? So, you touch my wife while we're walking through the store, I'm responding. I'm going to get in your face. I'm going to give you a bloody nose. I've already run that equation in my head. You shouldn't have touched my wife. You want to mess with my kids? And again, of course, we're talking about appropriate, measured responses. Somebody catcalls your wife, does not give you license to shoot them, okay? We're talking about appropriate, measured responses. But right now, the way we have been conditioned to think is that appropriate and measured usually just means be nice. Be nice, be nice, be nice. No, sometimes appropriate and measured means you act decisively and courageously and you sock the guy in the jaw. Okay? The other situation with the police officer, I've thought about it, and the conclusion that I've come to is next time, that bank robber, he's the wide receiver with the football, and I'm the free safety, and there's 5 seconds left on the clock. That guy is going down. Why? Because I'm watching a bank robber run from the cops. And I'm not just going to stand by and watch. And if our country was full of men who would not stand by and watch, our country would be a different place. A Christian civilization is the kind of civilization where men do not wait for others to act. We as Americans are descended from a long line of men who did not wait for others to act. They didn't pass the buck. They didn't kick the can down the road. They stood up. They acted courageously. So don't be ruled by feminine sensibilities. And this comes out in a bunch of different ways. It comes out in kind of the pietistic Victorian Isabel Alden sort of, make sure that your speech isn't offensive, and you really probably shouldn't drink alcohol, and you really probably shouldn't smoke anything, and just be nice, be nice, be nice. And look, I rarely drink alcohol and I don't smoke. I'm not encouraging any of those things for the sake of transgressiveness. I do not recommend cursing. I I would argue against cursing biblically. We are called to have edifying speech. But there are times for harsh words. And there's nothing wrong with having a glass of alcohol or a cigar. And if you're being ruled by a value structure that puts niceness at the top, then you're setting yourself up to live your life as a coward. Don't do it. Don't do it. Look for ways to practice courage. To bring this full circle, it comes back to Sneeko and the Islamic Republic of New Yorkistan. Because a society full of Christian men whose primary character quality is niceness is a sitting duck for Islam. We are not prepared to fight against the predations of wicked men who are actually courageous, who are actually willing to fight for what they believe in, who are actually willing to rape and murder your family. As Christian men, we are called to be prepared to act, and to act decisively and to act courageously. Another example that happened in recent history, I don't remember the man's name. I think it was Michael something, a man who there was a Satanist display set up in the city capital. And he tore the thing down. He's a Christian man. He saw it. He tore it down, and then he turned himself into the police. Well, that wasn't very nice, was it? No, it wasn't nice, but it was righteous. It was righteous, it was godly, and we need more men who will not simply walk by evil and say nothing. We need more men who will rule their households with loving, courageous, decisive authority. We need more men who will not wait for others to act, but who will take responsibility for the situation in which God has put them, and will stand strong and courageous and unmovable and do what is right, regardless of the consequences. May God give us the strength and the courage and the faith to be like David, to be killing the lions and the bears in our lives now, so that one day, if God presents us with a Goliath, we're ready. Let us be those men. Let us raise those men. Until next time, I'm Gabriel Huddleston, and this is Where the Battle Runs Thick.
Kiss the sun.